Welcome to the new step in your journey to create 3D characters. And a big congratulations on finishing these 3 major steps. And now we are on a relatively small step, which is creating UVs, as you can see. And in this lesson, we're going to learn about UVs as much as we can. So let's go. First of all, what is a UV map and why do we need it? Before creating the UV maps of our character, we need to understand what UV map is and why we need it, right? So UV maps are essentially 2D representation of 3D surfaces. It's like taking scissors and cutting along the edges of your 3D model and laying the pieces on a flat 2D plane. That's pretty much what a UV map is. It's not a real model, it's just a map. Now, why do we need it? Well, we need UV maps to properly project images on top of our 3D models. And we can rely on automatic or generated UVs without manually creating UVs for every object. And while they work for certain types of models, they do not work with all types of 3D models, especially organic ones like characters. In order to understand why using a UV map is a better way to project images or textures on the 3D model, we will go right into Blender now and demonstrate. For that, we will take a little more complex model, which is this monkey head, and we will look into its UVs. Let's go to UV editing workspace in Blender and look at its UVs. By default, this monkey head object comes with a UV map, but anything that you create by hand using modeling tools here will not have a proper UV map. Only the default objects will have default UV maps. So, like I said a little earlier, we need UV maps for mapping or projecting textures on top of our 3D model. So let's do that right now. To apply textures, we need a material. Let's go to Shading, create one material. I will call it Texture Test. Now let's bring in any texture and connect to the material. So I downloaded this random wood texture from Google Images. Let's connect this. Let's go back to Layout. We can actually see the texture by coming here to Shading Options and change this object color to Texture. We can shade smooth this object, or even better, we can give Subdivision Surface modifier. And look at the monkey head, and the 2D image that we downloaded from the internet is nicely mapped or projected onto this monkey head. So how is this happening? How does Blender know on which faces to project this image? Well, this is working because of the UV map of this 3D model. Now, to understand why UV map is important, let's delete the UV map and see what happens. We will select the object and we can find the UV maps from the object data properties, and here we have UV maps. Let's remove it. Now we lost the texture. Let's go back to Shading, and the texture is still connected. So we didn't actually delete the texture, we simply deleted the UV map, and Blender doesn't know how to properly project on top of the surface. As I mentioned earlier, we can use automatic ways to project the image on top of this 3D model, but the downside is we have very limited control over how to manipulate the texture or how to determine where to project the image on. Let me quickly demonstrate how to do that. Shift A and texture coordinate. We will take this node and we will also need the mapping node. Shift A, mapping node. By default, Blender uses this UV texture coordinate, and there is nothing here because we deleted the UV maps, but we also have this generated. It's a kind of automatic way, and as you can see, the image is stretched all around the model, but most importantly, we can't decide what to show on certain parts of the model. We can, for example, change this from flat to box, but there are some seams in random areas, as you can see here. We can make it slightly better by blending between the seams, but the texture direction is still random. So this might work for very simple objects or the objects which are not very important in the project, but for the characters it's not the case. They're very important and central in your projects. That's why we need proper UV maps of our character models. One more reason why automatic projection methods are not ideal for our purpose is the fact that they are different across programs. Blender's way of automatically projecting images may not be the same in Maya or Unity or Unreal Engine. So if we are planning to export our model for a game engine, for example, that's not what we want to do. But for UVs, it's a common language. It's absolutely the same across all programs. All of them understand UVs. So if we unwrap our model, create UVs, and apply textures using UVs, then we will be able to export our model along with textures, and in another program, for example in Unreal, they will simply plug in the textures and it will work like the same we see in Blender. So UV coordinates is the common language across all programs, and it's another major reason why we should be using UVs. And another reason, and I promise this is the last reason why we should be using UVs, is that we're going to paint our character using texture painting tools in Blender. So we will be painting the textures, and texture painting simply doesn't work without UVs. So we need the UVs for that process too. Now I hope you have enough information about UVs and why we need them. It's time for quick questions. So the questions are pretty simple. The first one is, what is a UV map? So UV map is a map that we create by unwrapping the faces of the 3D model, essentially creating a 2D representation, 2D map that we can project textures on. So it's mostly needed for mapping textures on our 3D models. Next question, do you know any other texture projection method in Blender? Well, I have shown how to use this generated texture coordinates and change this flat projection to box, and you can tweak it to get a better result. Of course, there are other ways and they're used for different purposes. And the last question, 3 reasons why we need UVs. We have seen several reasons why we need UV maps during the lesson, but the most important ones are, first, with UV maps we will have a lot more control on how to project, how to map the texture on different parts of the model. Second, we are going to paint our 3D model, so we need UV maps for that too. And lastly, UV is the one language that all different programs can understand. So if we have textures projected using UV maps, we can easily export our models from Blender to other programs like Unreal, and we will have no problem setting up textures there. We will simply plug in the necessary textures to the material and have the same result. So that was all for this lesson. I hope to see you in the next one. Now that we know what UV maps are and why they're important, we can start to learn how to create UV maps. Before creating a UV map to this poor monkey, I will demonstrate it on a more simple object. Let's create a cube, and by default it should also have a UV map, so let's delete it because we are going to create a new one, GZ1, to move it up to put on this flat plane. Now imagine this is a cardboard box and you have scissors to cut it open and lay flat on this 2D plane. Where would you start cutting? On which edge? So let's draw some edges just like these. For example, we could cut these 3 edges. Do you think it would open this 3D model? Well, I don't think so. We could cut this edge and this edge. Now, could this part open? Yes, it could lay here, but this couldn't because we didn't cut this edge, and we could cut this edge too. And now these 2 faces might be opened like that, this face might be opened like that, and this face like that. It's a terrible drawing. We could draw it from one angle, just like that, right there, and one there. Now we will actually do that now, but we will do it in UV editing workspace. Currently we don't have any UVs, so the steps are actually two. First, we mark necessary edges to be opened, and then we cut them open. That's the second step. Actually, by cutting them open, I'm not talking about cutting them literally in the edit mode. No, it's simply creating the representation. It's simply creating a kind of virtual map. It's like an additional property to this 3D model. So the first step, marking the necessary edges as seams. They are called seams. And the second step is to unwrap the model. That's what I refer to as cutting. So let's select the necessary edges in wireframe view actually. I think that's enough. Now the first step is to mark them as seams. How do we do that? Well, we have a UV menu here, or we can simply press U and bring up this UV menu. So we will mark them as seams. These red lines indicate that these edges are actually seams. Now that we have all the seams ready, we can move to the second step, which is unwrapping. We can do that by pressing A to select everything and U to bring up this UV menu and select one from these options. The first one is usually the best one. Let's select that. And here we go. We have a UV map here, and here you can see it. And it's just like the one that I drew on this plane. And in order to see the UV map, we need to be in object mode, or we need to select all faces to see them in the UV map. So that's the basics of creating a UV map. And if you want to learn more, you can check out our beginners course where we talk about UV maps a bit more. Now we know the basic steps. Let's create a UV map for this poor monkey because we deleted its UV map. Now, do you remember the steps? Of course you do. The first step is deciding which edge to mark seams and marking them seams, of course. And then the second and final step is to unwrap it. And regarding the scenes or marking the scenes, we need to select the edges which are not very visible. Why? Because when we map or project images on top of this UV map, the texture edges or textures will be connected along those edges. So they might be visible as seams. That will not be a big problem in our case because we are going to paint textures, but if you use some ready textures, you might see some seams. So anyway, it's still better to select the edges which are not very visible. And another equally important thing to keep in mind while UV unwrapping is image stretch. That means we need to select the edges so that when the mesh is separated along those edges to create UV map, they should lie on a 2D plane without too much stretching. So in order to explain what I mean, I will try to demonstrate that. Imagine we are cutting these edges along these edges, let's say, right? Now imagine this ear is real and made of, for example, paper, right? And you cut it off. Do you think you can open it without tearing or without cutting any more edges and lay it flat without any stretch? I hope you understand what I'm talking about. So this is a real ear made of paper, and we cut this off and we try to lay it flat on a table. Do you think we could achieve it in real life without too much stretching, without any tearing or extra cutting? Well, that would be impossible. We would really have to tear it apart and lay it on the table, right? And how about an extra cut around here? How about that? Well, that would be a lot more achievable. With this cut, we can easily take the ear and lay it flat on the table without too much stretching. Well, it's the same concept here in UV unwrapping. So let's mark these edge seams. Now, about the face, I'm going to select these edges, this edge loop. I'm not very careful because it's just a demonstration. You mark seams and the face will be a separate UV island. So let's select this edge until here. U, mark seam. And the eyes of this monkey head are actually separate objects. And objects like this, which are almost open, don't have to have any seams. Blender can automatically unwrap them, so we don't have to mark any seams there. I think we have all the seams, right? No, we don't have seams around this ear. So let's select the loop. U, mark seam. Now we have all the seams. We can unwrap and create the UV map. Select everything, press U, and choose the first option. Now we have a nice UV map of the monkey head. Please pause the video after each question and try to answer it yourself. So the first question is, what are the 2 basic steps to create a UV map in Blender? So the first step is select the necessary edges that you would like to mark as seams and mark seams by pressing U, select mark seams, and the second final step is to select everything, press U again, and choose one of the unwrapping methods. The next question, what things should we keep in mind while unwrapping? Well, we talked about 2 things. First is we need to select the edges which are not very visible around the surface of the 3D mesh, but we said that when we paint things, when we paint the texture, it's not very big of an issue. But still, we need to be a bit more careful about marking seams. For example, instead of marking seams in the middle of the face, we marked it around the face, which is not very visible when you look in front. And in the case of ears, we marked seams around the back of the ear instead of the front. We could have done that in front of the ear, but that's more visible. And the next thing we need to keep in mind is to minimize the stretch as much as possible. For example, I could have created the edge loop around here, right, which is not very visible, but it would create more stretch. The final question, how do you delete or create a new UV map of a mesh object in Blender? Well, I showed how to delete a UV map by coming here to Object Data Properties, to UV Maps and Delete, but here you can actually create a new UV map and unwrap it in a different way to have a second UV map. So that was all for this lesson. I hope to see you in the next one. Well, now we know what UV maps are, why they are important, and how to create them. We will learn a little about editing UV maps. So each of these pieces here are called UV islands, and we can select them by, for example, selecting one vertex and pressing Ctrl L. Now, what you can see here are not actual geometry. They simply correspond to the 3D elements like edges, vertices, and faces. And you have select options from here. For example, now we can select points, we can move them, rotate, scale them. You can select edges, just like that, but they're barely visible. You can select faces. Again, you can rotate them, scale them, move them. Or you can select entire pieces, which are called UV islands. Now, ideally, UV map should be placed in a square map like this, square shape. And if your UV map is not square for some reason, you might be using some non-uniform rectangular image. So if it is non-uniform, you can delete the UV map and delete any images that you're using here. And you shouldn't load any images here. After you have created the UV map in a square shape, you can load new images. For example, let's load this wood image. But for editing, let's remove it. Removing the image from here will not remove it from the material. Keep that in mind too. This is just for reference and demonstration. Now I'm going to tell you another really important thing, or rather two important things. Please keep this in mind. First of all, the UV islands shouldn't overlap like this, because this way they share the same part of the texture, which is not ideal. Secondly, you need to use the square shape, the square image as much as possible, which means you shouldn't have empty spaces. You shouldn't have a lot of empty space, I mean. If it's possible to scale UV islands and cover more area, more space in the square shape, you should do it. So it's important not to leave too much empty space because you waste resources this way. Well, I think there is one more thing. So here it is. You need to scale up the important parts of the UV map, like the face, because you need to see more detail on the face. You look at the face a lot. And you need to scale down the UV islands, which correspond to not very important areas. For example, the head. The head is usually under the hair and you never see it. So you can scale it way down to save up more space for important areas. But you shouldn't go too crazy doing this. Let me show you what's happening by plugging in the texture. Now let me actually show you what's happening by going to Material Preview. Look at the face, it should have more detail. Let's go to Edit Mode and let's look what's happening here. Well, it's not using the UV map because we changed it from here. Let's use the UV map. Let's go back to Flat and turn up Roughness so that we see the detail better. Let's go back to UV Editing. And now look at the face. It's much more detailed than the back of the head, which is not usually visible when it's covered with hair. So this is what's happening. This is what I mean by scaling up or down the parts depending on how necessary they are. If you scale this face way up, you see that it's very detailed. Now I hope you understand it much better. Let's go to Edit Mode again and look at a few options that we have here. We have a huge list of UV map options. One useful thing is this constraint to image bounds. If you click on it, you cannot go outside this square box. So you can use this option while you are editing the UV islands. So another useful option here is this Pack Islands. You can click on this and pack in order to place the UV islands nicely outlined in this UV map. But you should do it after you have scaled up the necessary parts or scaled down them. If you think you have scaled the UV islands incorrectly, you can come here and use another option, which is this Average Island Scale. You can click on it and it will scale them proportionally to the scales in the real 3D mesh. Let me show you another useful option here. If you think some parts of the UV islands are overlapping, you can find them by coming here to Select and choose Select Overlap. And Blender will try to find the faces which are overlapping, and you can move the objects back in order to fix that overlap. And another important feature, and probably the last one for this lesson, is here, which shows UV Stretch. If you click on this, you can see the stretching. The colors will go from blue to red as the faces are stretched. Now to demonstrate the stretch better, let's go back, and I think you remember we talked about how this paper ear would be stretched if you didn't cut it along this edge. So let's remove these seams, press U and clear seams. Now we don't have seams here. Go to Face Select Mode, select any face and press L to select the UV island and press U, unwrap. By default it's showing stretched angles, so it might look okay, but let's come here and see how much stretch each area has. And as you can see, some faces are completely red, which means a lot of stretch is going on. So this is a terrible unwrap. Let's add those seams back. Now we are looking at area stretch, and we don't have much stretch around the areas. If we have any yellow or red, it means a lot of stretch is going on that face. And you should probably mark extra seams and unwrap it again. So that's all that I wanted to show you. Now it's time for quick questions. Let's start quick questions. The first question: what are the 2 things you can do to improve texture detail using UVs? The first thing is to try to use as much available space as possible. For that, you can select the UVs and scale it up, try to move, and try to cover as much space as possible. The second thing is to scale up or scale down different UV islands depending on how important and how visible on the 3D model they are. For example, the face is very important because we look at the face a lot. We can come closer to the face, but the back of the head is not very important because it's usually under the hair. The second question: how do we detect and fix overlapping UV islands? Imagine that some UV islands are overlapping like this and they're not visible to our eyes, and we can automatically detect that and fix that. In order to do that, we can come to select and select overlap, and you can see only the overlapping parts of the UVs are selected, and you can select the UV island or piece of the UV which is causing the problem and move it away so that they do not overlap. The next question is similar: how do we detect and fix UV stretch? Well, we talked about it a lot in this lesson. We can come here to UV overlays and turn on UV stretch. We can choose from angle or area. We should look for red areas, which mean there is a lot of stretch, and the blue areas are ideal, and we should aim for more blue areas in the UV map. In order to fix any red areas, we can select the corresponding piece of the UV and find that on the 3D mesh. And if you struggle to find, you can come here and turn on synced selection and select any face which is red. You can press L to select the whole UV island, and you can find it selected here. And if it has a lot of stretch, you can cut extra seams, or rather you can mark seams and select this specific part and unwrap it, and then you can scale it to fit along with other UV islands. So that's all for this lesson. I hope to see you in the next video. Now we know enough information about UVs, we can start thinking about how to unwrap our model. But before we unwrap our character model, we'll have to think about a few things. We need to do a few things. First and most important thing, we need to make sure that our model is finished, that we have modeled all the necessary parts and edited them the way we want. Of course, we can add some extra details later, but not everything can be added later. So we need to make sure that our character looks the way we want. Second, we need to apply the modifiers. Sometimes we can leave the mirror modifier, and I will talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that. Next, we need to check our model for errors like inverted normals, flat overlapping geometry, etc. And then we will also have to apply the transforms. Then, as always, as a safety step, we can duplicate the blend file and keep the clean model as a backup. And finally, we will delete all the unused data, such as archived models, hidden objects, and collections. So, the first step is to look carefully at our model and make sure it's finished. And I noticed that the shirt is a bit too short. I will bring it down a little to make it a bit longer and cover more of the trousers. So let's go to edit mode, select this loop, enable proportional editing, G, Z, just like that. I will scale it up a little. Yeah, that's looking better. We can scale it down along y-axis as y. Maybe we will move this vertex, GY. Okay, that's fine. Now we can also delete the upper part of the trousers because they are hidden under the shirt, X vertices. Let's hide the shirt and see how it's looking. And as you can see, we can delete this X vertices. Yeah, we can leave it like that. And one more thing is we don't have eyebrows. We can, of course, simply paint the eyebrows, but if we have it physically present here, it's better as a separate model. So let's go to edit mode of the face. We can duplicate a few faces to make the eyebrows. This is nice selection. Shift D, P, and selection. We can separate it like that. We will add solidify modifier. We can change the offset direction like that. It's too much. 0.002. Let's hide it for now. Go to edit mode. Select everything. Alt S to separate it from the face. And we will change the position to GZ, just like that. Actually, let me apply shrink wrap modifier. So now we will slowly edit that. Let's go to edit mode. Let's turn on the topology mode. Now we have these nice eyebrows. We can add any other missing parts. While modeling the eyebrows, I noticed that we're missing eye sockets, which is a nice touch. We need to have those in order not to see through the face, right? We don't have to have the entire eye socket, which is closed. A simple extrusion into the head will be enough to close any gaps which might be visible. So we will select this loop and extrude along y-axis and scale it slightly. Alt S, SX. Yeah, I think these are enough. Yeah, we had to have those. Now I think we have made the necessary changes and added the missing details. We can move to the second step to prepare our character, which is applying the modifiers. First, the hair, we don't have any modifiers because these are curves. The eyebrows, we will keep the mirror modifier. For eyes, we will keep the mirror modifier. And the head, the face, we will need to apply the mirror modifier. Now, let me tell you what the advantages and disadvantages are when we keep the mirror modifier. So you probably already know why it's good. The mirror modifier is very useful when we don't mind identical details on both sides. For example, the eyes, we don't mind having identical eyes, right? When we have a mirror modifier, the texture will be the same on both sides. We can do that for the eyebrows, for the eyes, but for the face, we need to have some asymmetrical details. So we cannot have symmetrical or mirror texture on the face. It will look really weird. Another advantage of having a mirror modifier is we will save some texture space and we will save some time unwrapping the model. For example, for the shirt, if we want to have mirror texture, if we don't mind that, we can simply unwrap one side and the other side will reflect that UV. So both parts will use the same UV space, the same texture space, so we will have better texture detail and we will have less time unwrapping this model. So it's another advantage. And we talked about the disadvantage already, which is having mirror texture on both sides. For example, if you want to draw or paint something on one side of the shirt, it will simply reflect on the other side, which might not be what we want. So that's a disadvantage of having a mirror modifier. With that being said, we need to apply the mirror modifier on the head. So for that, Shift H to hide everything. We will check for problems again, apply the mirror modifier. Now I think the details are okay. We need to select this edge loop in the middle. So it selects all the way. Select this one. It will also select. If we ever have a problem, we can always delete one part and add the mirror modifier back. Alt H. How about the shirt? The shirt can be symmetrical, but I'm going to apply the mirror modifier because I want to have asymmetrical details along the shirt. The shirt, we already applied the mirror modifier. For the legs and the shoes, we will keep the mirror modifier. Now, the next step is to check for any problems, any errors, such as inverted normals and overlapping geometry. So let's come here and show face orientation, show any inverted normals, look for any red spots, red faces. We don't have any, I think, so everything is looking good. Now we will try to delete any overlapping geometry. Let's select these things. Actually, we don't have to select, we shouldn't select the curves, we will hide that. We can select mesh objects. Let's select these, go to edit mode, select everything, press M and choose by distance. We didn't delete any vertices, which is good news. We can also manually look around and see if we have any problems. Now, as the next step, we need to apply the transforms. Let's select everything, Control A, and apply all transforms. Now we have a clean character, and as a next step we can duplicate this blend file and keep one as a backup. Now if you have duplicated the file, we have another step, which is deleting everything else that we don't need. So we will have all these in one collection. Press M and let's call it character, and we will delete everything else in the blend file. So let's hide that and unhide everything else. As you can see, we have so many things. So we will delete all these because we have them in other blend files too. And now we can unhide our character. And Blender also allows us to clean up the blend file by coming to File menu, Clean Up, Purge, Unused Data. As you can see, one camera, one light, 10 meshes and 2 images. They're going to get deleted, so let's delete them. And after you close this blend file, you can see the blend file size has decreased too. You will notice that too. Now we not only have a clean 3D character, but also a clean blend file. So our character is finally ready to be unwrapped, which we will do in the next lesson. But now it's time for quick questions. Now, the first question, what are the prerequisites for UV unwrapping and why they are important? Now, I hope you remember these steps. The first step is to make sure the model is finished. Why it's important? Because if we haven't finished the model and we unwrap it, later we might need to add something or delete something which will break the UV map and essentially break the texturing, and we will need to do all these things over again. The second step is to apply the modifiers, and the same thing happens here. If we don't apply the modifiers and unwrap, after we unwrapped, we might want to apply the modifiers which might not work as we wanted, especially for the modifiers which generate geometry or delete geometry. We need to apply the modifiers before we unwrap. The next step is to check for errors. This is important for any scenarios, including UV unwrapping. And if we check for example, inverted normals or overlapping geometry, and if we fix any errors related to them, this will make our model consistent and the UV maps clean. We also need to apply the transforms to prevent problems while painting and texturing. The last two steps are optional but necessary for safety and clean optimized project. The next question is pretty simple. How can the mirror modifier be good or bad for UVs? One good thing about the mirror modifier is it saves time, that we don't have to unwrap, for example, both hands. We unwrap only one and the second will be simply copied. Another good thing is it saves texture space, which means we will use the same texture space only for one hand, and it will have, for example, 2K or 4K texture. And if we don't have the mirror modifier, the texture will be divided to these both hands, and we will have half the resolution. And one bad thing about mirror modifier, well, it's just a mirror modifier and it mirrors the texture and everything along with it. So we will lose the ability to have asymmetrical detail. So sometimes, for example, in the case of face, we should delete the mirror modifier. So that was all for this lesson. See you in the next one. Now, finally, we are going to unwrap our character model. First, we will start from the body parts. Let's go to the head, and actually we will have the UV maps for the eyebrows too. So let's go to edit mode, select everything. Let's hide everything else. Go to edit mode, select these faces. We don't need these faces, or maybe we will simply select these edges. Mark seams, that's all. Alt H. We're going to paint the eye texture, so we're going to unwrap this too. So let's go to edit mode, Shift Z. We will select a nice loop from here. I think this loop is okay. We need to make sure that this loop is not visible when the eye rotates, looks around. Shift H, go to edit mode, mark seam. And I think that's enough. The back of this shape will be very small, so because we don't need many details there. Now, the most important part, the head and the face. How are we going to unwrap it? Let's go to edit mode. So this is pretty challenging, so let's test this loop. No, it doesn't work very well, but we can come here. I think I'm going to hide the hair. Mark seam. Now we will test it with the hair. Let's go to edit mode. I think this is nice. We don't see that, so that's looking nice. And remember, we have the inside of the mouth that we need to separate. We don't need any detail there, so let's select this loop. U, mark seam, and the inner part of the mouth is not very important. And also inner part of the eyes. These are also some geometry which will take some space. They are there just to fill the gaps. U, mark seam. And with this hairstyle, we don't need many details on the ears too, but we might change the hairstyle, or you might change the hairstyle so ear will be more visible then. So we will have the ears on their separate UV islands. Now about the back of the head, ears and the neck. Let's hide this. Also, we need to think about the inner part of the mouth. Change the face select mode, select this face, L, hide it, and you can see the inner part of the mouth. We can have one edge loop here, and I think that's enough. U, mark seam, and this will open the mouth. The neck, we'll have something like this here. Actually, let me select the inner part of the mouth and hide it. It's select mode. I'm holding down Shift to select both parts. Maybe a little different from here. You can hold down Control to deselect. Now we need to separate the ear. U, mark seam. Now the back of the head is a single UV island, but we will keep the back of the neck as a separate island too, because this might need more detail. So we will do it from here. If we change the hairstyle, this part will be visible, so it will need higher detail. So we shouldn't scale it down too much on the UV map. U, mark seam. Now the ear. We will do the same here too. We could have done it a little differently, but I tried to select the edges which are not very visible when you look at the character. And these edges will also be under the hair, so they won't be visible either. Now, a really important thing here. Please pay close attention. We have marked UV seams on the head and the face, right? This object, but we haven't unwrapped it yet, because we need to decide if we are going to have the same UV map for multiple objects or for this head, for this single object. What I mean is, now without unwrapping, before unwrapping, I can mark seams on the hand or any other object and select all of them, go to edit mode, select everything and UV unwrap them together, which means they will have one UV map, which means again they are going to use one texture. That's important. But if I now go to the head, edit mode of the head, because I have marked the seams, right? I select everything and I unwrap it alone, yeah, and this head will have its own UV map, which means one texture will be spent on this head alone, and it will not be used for the hands or for the legs, etc., which is a good thing if we are focusing on the quality of the texture. but we will end up using another texture for the hand and the legs, which might not be ideal for performance. And when possible, we need to use one texture for the entire character body parts, like the skin, like legs, hands, and the face, and one texture set for the clothes. So if you focus on high quality, if you want to render your character in a close-up shot, you might want to create UV maps for the head alone, and for the hands and legs, or for the trousers alone. So each item, each object, like shirt and the head or the trousers, each of these parts will have their own material, will have their own texture sets, and will be higher quality. But it will be more expensive and less performant when you want to use, for example, this character in your game. So please keep this in mind. So I'm going to use one texture set, I think 4K texture set for the entire skin parts, body parts, like the hand, legs, and the face. Of course, the hands and legs will use mirrored UVs. Both hands will use the same texture, and the same goes with the legs too, so not very problematic. That's why now I'm not going to go into edit mode and unwrap this. We will do it together with the hand and the legs. So let's go into the hand. Actually, let's Shift H and hide everything else. So go to edit mode. Unwrapping the hand is pretty simple. Now I think the hand is ready to be unwrapped. Alt H. The legs, they're not really legs, they are part of the legs, so pretty simple. Just select this loop, mark seam, that's all. Now, which objects are going to have the same UV map and essentially the same material and the same texture set? We need to decide. So the face, hands, and legs, they will have the same UV map, the same material, and the same texture set. We can add eyebrows to that, but not the eyes, because the eyes will be high resolution. They will need to have their own texture set. So let's go select the head, eyebrows, hands, and the legs. Multiple objects, go to edit mode, select everything, press U, and unwrap angle based. Now let's test it by going to UV editing. That's not a really bad UV. We might change a few things if we want. Now let's unwrap the clothes, the shirt. It's also pretty simple. Edge select mode, this edge loop, and this edge loop. And the same edge loops over here. You might be wondering, why don't we use a mirror modifier, because we are selecting the same edge loops on both sides. But the problem is, even if we are selecting kind of mirrored edge loops, we will have different details on both sides. But with the mirror modifier, we won't be able to do that. Mark seam, the trousers, again, pretty simple. Select this edge loop maybe, yeah. This edge loop, mark seam, and I'm going to select one edge loop over here because I don't want to have very long UV islands. So mark seam, trousers are ready. How about the shoes? These will have an edge loop over here, seams over here. The bottom will be quite simple. Mark seam, bottom, it will be very small and will have very small details, and not very important part. Mark seam, mark seam. We will see. These will have the same UV map. Go to edit mode, select everything with A, press U, and unwrap. Let's go to UV editing. Now all the closes have the same UV map and they will have the same material, the same texture set. Which part is this? Ah, yeah, shoes. And I don't think that's ideal. We have a little problem here, I think. All right, I think I left this edge. U, mark seam. I guess now this will be much better. L, U, unwrap, and we make it much smaller, just like that. We will keep it somewhere. Actually, let's select faces, Control L or L, and put it anywhere you want. Now we can select everything here and UV, average island scale, because we unwrapped individual objects, Alt H. Now we have almost finished because we have inner mouth objects here, which I'm not going to paint textures on or give any textures. They will have simple color materials, but still we are going to unwrap it because someone other than us might want to give textures or might want to paint them. So let's unwrap. So we will give very simple seam. Let's hide other things. Shift H. We'll give a seam. We will mark a seam around here, I think. About here too. Mark seam. Unhide everything. Hide the face. The teeth. These are... We could use mirror modifier, but it will be a little more work, so I'm not going to use mirror modifier there. I will simply select these edge loops, mark them as seams, and simply unwrap from there. These ones, Control 7 to look from the bottom. U, mark seam, and the tongue, if you haven't applied any modifiers on these objects, you can apply them now. The tongue, we will have simple edge loop here, U, mark seam, and that's, I think, enough. They will share the same UV map with the eyes, so let's go select all of these guys, go to edit mode, select everything, U, and unwrap. Let's go to UV editing. We can edit the UVs later. Now, I believe we have unwrapped everything apart from the hair, of course, because hair is made using curves and they have automatic UVs, so we don't need to worry about that. Now, a small challenge for you. You need to unwrap all the necessary objects on the character. So please do that before moving to the next lesson, and I hope to see you there. In this lesson, we are going to edit and optimize the UVs of our character model. Let's start from the head, go to edit mode. I will simply make the seams a bit more beautiful, so let's select these edges. Yeah, this is slightly better, I think. U, mark seam, and we will remove these edges because they look a bit too jagged. Clear seams. Now we can unwrap it again. We will select these objects. These objects share the same UV map, so let's go to edit mode, select everything, U, and unwrap one more time. Let's go to UV editing. As you can see, we have a lot of empty space. We should make use of that. We will scale things up or down to optimize the UV map. Let's select this large part, L. This is the back of the head, so we can scale it down, not too much. Make it smaller. This part, we will keep it, and this part, yeah, we will keep these, but we will scale up the face a little. When you are moving around, you can turn on constrain to image bounds. This way we cannot go out of the image bounds. What are they? Yeah, the back of the ears. We'll put the ears in one place. Let's move them around here. We will scale up the hands too. Actually, we need to do it together. We need to do these two together. I think this is better than before. Now, what about the eyebrows? Eyebrows also share the same UV with these objects, like the head and hand, but I'll change it, and this will share the same UV map with the eyes and inner mouth objects. But before doing that, let's optimize the UV maps for the clothes. Let's select all these clothes, go to edit mode. I think we can optimize this too. So let's scale everything up and let's see if we can fit them. I think we can split this. Let's do it on the back, no, on the front too, because we have split the back. Now we will select this and this view, unwrap, and we will make them much smaller. Now let's deal with the eyes. Actually, I'm going to duplicate this eyeball because we will have inner eye shape and outer shape. So let's do that. Go to edit mode. Let's make one of them slightly smaller. We can do something like this. I will show you. Let's select this, shade it smooth. We can come to the material. We will give simple eye material, eyes. And in viewport display options, we can turn down alpha so we can see the inside. Let's select the inner eye, select everything, scale it up a little, and now we will change the shape, face select mode, select these faces, Control plus, and move this inwards, Control plus S to scale it down a little. I think we don't have to scale it down. Let's scale it back to its maybe shade auto smooth. This looks alright. And we will move the eyes slightly upwards, just like that. Make it smaller a little. Yeah, this looks much better. Alt H. If you notice any gaps, you can always fix it. In edit mode, you can move vertices around. I don't see any gaps. Maybe we'll make the inner circle slightly smaller. We will bevel the edges. There's a lot of medical terms related to the eye parts, but we don't worry too much about them. But I believe this part is usually bulging out slightly, and this part is called cornea, I believe. So whatever it is, we will make it bulging out slightly, just like that. Maybe one more edge loop. Now I think we can unwrap it one more time and move to the next step. The inner part of the eye, the cover, eyebrows, teeth, gums, and tongue. Let's go to edit mode, select everything, hue, unwrap, and let's go to UV editing and see how they look. And we will need the most detail on the eyes and the eyebrows. Everything else can be much smaller, because we will give them simple colors. And just now I remembered about the inner part of the mouth. I believe we forgot to unwrap it with the head because I didn't see that. Let's go back to the head, go to UV editing. Let's select the hands and legs. Go to UV editing, select everything. And there isn't the part of the inner mouth, I think. Face select mode, select this face, L. Hide it. Yeah, inner mouth. There is no UV island for that. We can also fix the scale, as you can see. Shift H, go to edit mode. We need to select this loop and make it slightly bigger. Yeah, now it's covering the teeth, which is nice, but we're interested in the UV map. We don't have the UV map. Hue, unwrap, and make it much smaller. And put it anywhere, actually. We will give very simple color to that. Now, about these parts of the body, let's select them, hide it, and select all of these objects. Go to edit mode. We will select these and make them much smaller. Here, Let's make it smaller. So most of the texture will be spent on the eyes. Now we have finished editing the UVs. It's time for quick questions. So the first question is quite easy. How do you select the UV islands on the 3D mesh in Blender? Well, it's quite simple and we have done it multiple times during the lessons. It's simply pressing L, but when we select one vertex and press L, it selects the entire mesh. If we want to select a UV island, which is limited by the seams, we need to be in face select mode and select any face, press L, and it will select a UV island. How do you select linked elements on the UV map? Well, it's almost the same thing. You just hover over a UV island and press L. You can do it with multiple islands. You can select some parts of multiple islands and press Ctrl L. So the next question is a little trickier. How can we make multiple mesh objects share a single UV map? Well, it's also quite simple. If you select one object and unwrap it alone, for example, press A, U, and unwrap, its UV map will take the entire UV space, this square space. But if we select multiple objects and unwrap them at the same time, they will share one UV map. This is what sharing a single UV map or a UV space means. We normally do this when we want to use one texture for these multiple objects. So the last question is a question/challenge. The question is, what is our character currently missing? Please look at the character and find what is missing. So currently our character is missing a small detail, which is eyelashes. You're going to create the eyelashes as a challenge and unwrap it and add to the UV map of the eyes, brows, and other elements. So that was all for this lesson. See you in the next one. In this video, we will create the eyelashes and unwrap it and add its UV to the existing UV map. We can extract the eyelash from the eyes, Alt H, from here. So let's select a few faces. We can start the eyelashes from here or even here. Now we will unwrap the eyelashes and add it to the UV map of the eyes and other objects. UV editing, hide the head, select these objects. Let's hide other things, and we will have these things which should share the UV space. Go to edit mode, select the eyelashes, and unwrap. We don't need seams because it's a planar object. It's too big, so let's select it. Ctrl L, S to scale down. It should be roughly equal to the eyebrows. We will move the tongue away from here. We can make it smaller. Now I'd like to do one thing. I'd like to add subdivision surface modifier to the eyebrows because I'd like to make it look slightly better. Just like that. And as you can see, the UV map didn't change much. So please create the eyelashes and unwrap it, and then you can move on to the next lesson.